Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another question of the week. What were the small arms used by the Federation and Zeon? Now, I got asked this question a long time ago, so unfortunately I did forget who asked it. But I did always keep it in the back of my mind because I thought it would make for a really interesting video, if I was able to find more information about it. And now I have so much information on their small arms that I'm actually turning it into two videos. One on Zeon small arms and then one on Federation and civilian small arms. So let's jump straight in with Zeon's main weapon, the Taiga 70R submachine gun, sometimes also spelled as Taiga, which is one of the katakana spellings for tiger that you can also find in Japanese. So it could also be the Tiger 70R submachine gun. But the spelling that was in the newest source was Taiga, so that is what I'll be using for the rest of this video. And the name isn't the only interesting thing about this gun. The barrel has a shock absorber to make the recoil less heavy, and when you think about Zeon as like a space colony nation, it does make sense because their design philosophy, of course, all centered around making guns as practical as possible in space. So two of the main things that they were focusing on were one, being able to use these things while wearing a spacesuit, and two, making the recoil as low as possible because, of course, they were thinking about shooting these in low gravity situations or zero gravity situations. The problem with this is that, of course, you get extra moving parts, and then there's also the problem of where those moving parts are located. As long as you're gripping onto the magazine, no problem. But as soon as you start firing the gun and it slips down a bit, or your hand naturally moves up a bit, that's where that recoil absorption mechanism is. So that's potentially gonna hurt quite a bit, or it's gonna catch your spacesuit, which is also not great. To aim then, it has what has been described as a unique sensor, which is definitely an apt description for this thing, because I have no idea how I would have to use this. We also don't know which rounds that this thing fires, but we do know that they're the same rounds as their main ground forces rifle. This gun is simply known as Zeon's assault rifle, and its design feels very reminiscent of medieval Germany's STG-44. Because the rifle was meant for use on Earth, space features like the shock absorber were omitted, making the gun a lot easier and cheaper to produce. It also looks a lot more like a gun you would actually find in real life. Just don't go looking for this thing in the OG anime, because this was a much, much later addition to Zeon's arsenal. And just to make sure, but I mean that in the real life sense. This gun was used during the 1 Year War, but it was designed way after the OG anime was made. What you will find in the anime is Zeon's sniper rifle, another very distinct looking gun that was meant to be used in space, and that's probably also why the sniper scope looks the way it is. It's another design that was meant to be as usable as possible with a spacesuit on. Also, the scope does all of the calculations for distance and whatnot. Or, if you don't like your sniper rifles to have a scope, you can also use it without, just like Char did in the anime. Next up is Zeon's Recoilless Rifle, which takes the shock absorber design even further. Rather than just the barrel, it is now the entire upper receiver that moves backwards. This is definitely not going to make it easier to aim, but at the very least, there is now something protecting your left hand. For close combat then, Zeon forces could choose between two weapons. This more obscure submachine gun, simply known as the close combat submachine gun, or the more well-known close combat rifle. It is described as being about the size of a carbine, or a larger submachine gun, and would mainly be used in ground combat. It also very much looks like an MP-40. A potential development of this gun then was the Smarza MP-71. a machine pistol with a receiver assembly that was very similar to that of the close combat rifle. And the MP-71 in turn might have inspired the submachine gun that was used by Zeon Special Forces. This gun appears to be a shortened version and uses the same 9mm parabellum rounds as Zeon's pistols. And here's the fun thing, by the time the OG Gundam takes place, these were considered, well, the 9mm parabellum rounds were considered as antiques from a bygone era, but I would say if they work, they work. I doubt anyone being shot with a 9mm in like Universal Century is gonna be like, thank God they only shot me with an antique round. Just imagine if it had been a more modern round, like that would have been a problem. Also, the gun has a 36-round double-stack magazine. One of Zeon's pistols then, confirmed to be using that 9mm round, is the Naban or Naban Type 62. I've seen both spellings in different sources, but Naban seems to be the more common one. Now, if we're gonna consider 9mm parabellum as an antique, then this gun might as well be considered a dinosaur. It was Zeon's first service pistol, and they decided to design it with a toggle action. In the looks department, it is very obvious what they were going for. It's a space Luger, but here's the thing. Toggle action pistols pretty much stopped being made in the 30s, and that's the 1930s, not the UC 30s. After this one though, they decided to go with a much more modern looking pistol, the Walta P08-M. Optional attachments for this gun include a silencer and also a drum magazine to turn it into a makeshift submachine gun. And here, it's not just the gun itself that's inspired by real life, but also like the switch to a different gun. The Walta P08-M looks like it's primarily inspired by the Walther P38, with some elements taken from the earlier Walther Model 4. And just like the Walta was Zeon's replacement for the Space Luger, the Walther was medieval Germany's replacement for the Luger. Later still, Neo Zeon would adopt the small form factor Maruda HSB. After the 1 Year War, there was like a trend within the Federation to go for ever smaller handguns, and Neo Zeon decided to follow suit. Back to the 1 Year War then, for one of Zeon's most famous sidearms, the laser handgun. Now, despite being prominently featured and being a very famous weapon, it might surprise you that we don't actually know that much about it. It seems to be exclusively for like Zeon's high-ranking officers, including the zombies themselves, and rather than bullets, it fires lasers, which is like one of the only, or like the only handheld weapon that can do this in the Universal Century. So I would have loved to have some more information on this thing, and especially about its shortcomings, because it's like the only laser weapon we see in Gundam, like for personnel purposes. So why wasn't this more widely used? Like, were there overheating problems? Was it expensive to produce? Or was it something else entirely? Another one of Zeon's strange weapons then was their bazooka. Now, by itself, it wasn't that weird for an anime weapon, especially not for an anime weapon from the 70s. And the scope is probably, again, the way it is, to make it easier to use with a spacesuit on. But here's the thing. Its design is exactly the same as the giant bazooka used by the Dom, and unfortunately, we don't have any official confirmation about which one came first. Was the bazooka inspired by the giant bazooka, or was the giant bazooka inspired by the normal bazooka? Also, in the original anime and even in the compilation movies, this thing is shown as firing a beam. But in like later video game cutscenes like this one, this beam would be replaced by a rocket, which sounds a lot more likely. More heavy firepower then came in the form of this recoilless rifle. It was developed late into the war and was considered to be an excellent piece of kit. It was praised for being accurate and would continue to be used after the war. Also, don't confuse it with the other recoilless rifle that we talked about earlier in the video. In Japanese, the names are slightly different, but they both translate to recoilless rifle in English. I guess we could call this one the recoilless gun instead. Next up, we have the Mazura MG74, which was no doubt both styled and named after a development of Germany's famous MG42. The Austrian MG74, like the name is literally identical, and just like its real-life counterpart, it was a general-purpose machine gun that could be used by infantry troops as is, or a slightly modified version could be mounted on the Walta. This version uses a shorter barrel without the bipod, and it also doesn't have the buttstock. But I do want to point one thing out. It is mostly on like the modern reinterpretation of the Walta that we see the MG74 mounted. Examples of this are in MS Igloo, Requiem for Vengeance, and the UC Hardcraft model kits. If you look at the OG anime, you'll see that the Walpas are using a much simpler machine gun, which also still sometimes appears in modern depictions of the Walta. So you're gonna have to make a choice here for your own headcanon. Either both of these guns are MG74s, it's just a very different artistic interpretation of the gun, or you could just choose which gun you wanted to mount on your Walta. One's the MG74, and the other one is an unnamed machine gun. Another classic then was this pump-action shotgun, simply known as Shotgun. It's based on a civilian model and would mainly be used by Zeon Special Forces, like the Cyclops team. The caliber isn't explicitly mentioned, but it is given as large calibers. So it's like a Remington Model 870 on the outside, but a KS-23 on the inside. Here's Bernie firing it. And finally, we get to Zeon's hand grenades, and unfortunately, there's not too much to say about them. I think these are gonna look very familiar because basically they're identical to two of the most famous 20th century American grenades. This is just a Mark II pineapple grenade, and this is just an M67 baseball grenade. And there's a good chance that the M67 grenade is literally identical because 1, it was made for ground combat, and 2, there are no changes listed. At least for the Mark II, they speculate that some modifications were made to make it more effective in space. So I guess we can call it the Mark II's Space Pineapple. Later on though, we would see some grenade developments. By the UC 0090s, this triple grenade launcher was developed that could be attached to the belt of a Neo-Zeon soldier. And they also specifically note here that these are not rockets, they're grenades. And that has been all for Zeon small arms, including a few Neo-Zeon ones. So join me next time as we talk about the Federation small arms, including some weapons meant for the civilian market. And if you have a question you want me to answer in a future question of the week video, you can leave that down below. As always, a big thank you to the Patreon supporters. I hope everyone watching has a great evening, and I'll see you all next time.